Hello, I'm David Connor, and I am interviewing Mr. Moth, or Michael Bird. He is here with me today. Why don't you introduce yourself? Maybe tell us a little bit about how you would describe your music. I won't try to box you into a genre or anything like that, because electronic music is pretty diverse. You can do a lot with it. So, how would you
Sure.
say that you're like what sounds might influence your music?
Well, that's kind of the funny thing is whenever you start to market electronic music, they're always want you to identify what subgenre you fit into. And I always kind of hit a wall with that because none of them, especially the contemporary ones, really have anything to do with what I would describe as the sound. Um, I'm kind of more of a collection of my influences that sort of make up that sound. Um, in the early days, I was really inspired by an experimental group called Coil. Um, they were one of the first big names of industrial music, and was also very influenced by a band called Ministry, who were also huge names in industrial music. But I've never sort of sought to make industrial music. Um, Although, I mean, I certainly have a lot of those elements built into my sound. Um, I've been inspired by a variety of different electronic musics, and I've always felt more at ease, kind of just experimenting and trying whatever genre or style suits me. So, I mean, I have some things that sound very club and very dance, some things that sound very new wave, and I have some very heavy guitar-driven songs too. But all of it is with the idea that it's kind of built on a framework of technology and sequencing and electronic beats.
Awesome. Yeah. So, to anyone who might be unfamiliar, industrial music is kind of that what you just described. A lot of technological process and the production of it, things like that. You'd say.
Yeah, well, in the early days, all of it started with a band called Throbbing Gristle, and they were sort of a performance art group and um, experimental with technology and sound. It wasn't really dancey, although there are a couple of songs that you could say that about. Um, but they were big on sort of sampling sounds that they would record around industrial London and would put them into sequencing and sort of create this electronic driven music that was using like pile drivers as percussive elements, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, so they were the ones who kind of started that whole genre, and it evolved. Like 20 years later, what people knew of industrial music was Nine Inch Nails and Ministry, but you would not really struggle to find anything in common with Throbbing Gristle. 20 years on now, what people regard as industrial sounds very different to me, but is unquestionably comes from the same source. Bands like Youth Code and Health, they're all making a variation of industrial music now.
Yeah, I read in one of your biographies on your website about. I saw those bands. Health was one of them, and I looked them up and listened to some of that stuff. And I do see what you're saying when you look at some of these bands and sort of envy their ability to do something completely new with electronic music. You know, just redefine the genre in a sense. And so that's something that you're trying to do.
Well, absolutely. So when I was a kid, I was really into punk. And what was most important out of that scene was originality. Because, you were kind of down with the same instruments. Finding something unique to do with them was important because then otherwise you just sound like every other band and who needs you?
Mm.
So to me, originality is super important, and that's one of the great things about electronic music, is because it's always evolving and somewhat in pace with technology. Um, the sound has evolved too, and uh, that's kind of the great thing about it is as soon as you turn around, there's a new piece of equipment out there that can completely change how you approach what you do. That happens, at least once every couple of years. There will be some new synth that drops that people are like, okay, well, this is a game changer, and it does evolve things.
So you said that you were in a punk band. Could you talk a little bit maybe about what got you started in music at the beginning? Maybe what inspired you, and also making that transition from playing rhythm guitar in a punk band to producing electronic music. What did that transition look like for you?
So what was funny about it was when I was a kid, um, everything that I know how to do really was self-taught. And when I started, um, I, I'd find music that would make me want to make music. So I picked up a guitar and would find a chord book and just taught myself by kind of just struggling to put my fingers in the right places to learn how to play guitar chords. I wanted to learn how to play keyboard-driven music because in the early '80s I was really inspired by a lot of the new wave bands. Specifically, Gary Newman was kind of the one that I always had in my mind, and begged my mom to get me a keyboard. And then I want to say probably my 13th birthday, she got me the what is now a classic, the Casio SK1, which was one of the first sampling keyboards that was really available to most consumers. And I started experimenting with sound and taking beats and slowing them down and creating what I, as a 13-year-old, thought was very original music. Um, you know, but I would call it audio art, and I would sort of like give it to as on cassettes to my friends, and most people were not at all impressed by this. But I just didn't let their lack of enthusiasm stop me. So I kind of continued building skills, and eventually, I started to get brave enough to start talking about playing with people. And the first sort of place I found was in playing rhythm guitar in pickup punk bands as a kid. It was at about '96 that I was still sort of trying to find a place for electronics in the bands that I was playing in, and started to get very frustrated with the fact that it seemed like everybody I wanted to play with was interested in playing sort of contemporary or at the time college pop rock. This was as grunge was dying, and there was enough of that in the world. I had lots of those bands that I thought were great, but I just didn't want to make more of it because there was plenty. Again, originality was super important to me. So I was looking for an avenue for electronics, and then it started to occur to me that a lot of the people that were inspiring me didn't play with anyone else. They just did everything themselves. And I was already, recording demos with a 4-track recorder. So I thought, well, why not do this? Why not try it myself and see what I can get done on my own? So that's kind of how it started, and I made some really terrible 4-track recordings that kind of I worked through that, evolved it, and slowly but surely kind of started building my skill set with digital recording, and to the degree that I was able to start making my own records and not have them sound terribly amateurish. It was about that point that I did kind of start. I'd always had the theory that if I built it, people would come, and I would be able to attract like minds if I could find them. If I had a thing that was my own and was going, and sure enough, I've over the years found collaborators that I continue to work with. The very first album that I put out in '99 features a bass player that I am still working with to this day. He's in Phoenix, so we do everything via the internet. But my guitarist for the subsequent 5 years after that is still occasionally collaborating with me too. So yeah, eventually I did kind of find a band, but I'm still largely doing everything myself. I'd kind of given up music in around 2005. I knew I wanted to come back to this project, but um, life and real opportunities to succeed had started to become available to me. Um, I ended up going to art school for graphic design. In the midst of doing that, I found my way to fine art and had started to find myself really comfortable with that. So that career took off, and I ended up becoming an art professor. Building that career and those media as my main employment um, it really occupied for much of the last about 10 years. Um, and then out of nowhere, a friend of mine had asked me if I wanted to join in his punk band. And I'd been kind of missing playing out. So I got back in and started playing guitar in his band. That lasted a couple of years. And then once I left that band, the last thing I wanted to do was play guitar anymore because
Hmm.
I'd just been doing that and that only for 2 years. So it was just a natural sort of step for me to go back to the electronics and pick up this project again. It had always been my sound, it had always been my voice. And if I was going to make music, it didn't make sense to start a new thing. It was just a matter of sort of stepping back into my own shoes. So I started it back up, and it took me a while to find my voice. It was not easy to regain the momentum that I had lost when I stepped away from the project. But before long, just kind of kept failing till the point that I succeeded again and was able to kind of make some progress. So the outcome of all of that work was the Desire album.
With producing electronic music, like you said, you can do it all by yourself, which is a great thing about it. How do
Mhm.
you think that has influenced your songwriting process? Maybe from before then to now, or maybe just describe what your songwriting process looks like now. Do you? I read somewhere about how, like, part of producing electronic music, you spend a lot of time honing in on very a certain part of a track. You'll hone in on it and just work on the layering, how the layers interact with each other, things like that. And for me personally, anytime I'm editing something or if I'm creating music through some kind of software, I get into this flow state, and it's really one of, like, my favorite experiences ever, is just creating something and just building on it and refining it and making it sound cool. So what does that look like for you?
Well, it's funny that you kind of put it that way because it's really appropriate. Um, there's a graphic designer who was talking about how the computer won't make you a great designer. At best, what it will do is it will facilitate you working quicker. And particularly when trial and error is how you arrive at things, you can kind of rifle through a lot of bad ideas to get to the good one quickly. Um, and that really follows, I think, almost all digital media now. Um, it's so fast, you don't have to struggle with getting um, 15 different devices to all sync up on MIDI and have the time together. The computer handles that and it just fires off everything together. And that has really made, I think, what modern day production does possible. that fantastic art experience you have, where you will take a step, and then the media will ask you to do something different with it. So you hear it and you respond to it, and then it's this dialogue that happens, and that dialogue, once it opens up, is the reason to make anything. That relationship with media where it really starts to become a dialogue. It's like, I mean, I hate to sound too prosaic about it, but it's almost holy, you know. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the great thing about it, and particularly now, when I started, it wasn't true that you could kind of do everything inside one box. Um, I'm amazed. Uh, Not that I use it, but that GarageBand is something that you can put on an iPhone and make more complex uh, arrangements and programming and recordings than I could when I started with all of the gear that I might pile up in a room. And that just blows me away. I mean, it's hard to do something kind of original with that equipment, but with like GarageBand, but that you can do that in a device that you carry in your pocket is mind blowing to me. Um, but yeah, nowadays, being able to kind of take a laptop, find a spot in the coffee shop, put some headphones on, and build up half the track. I mean, how can you argue with that? That's, you know, that's the most liberation you can get as an artist.
Yeah. Going off of something you said there about that process being somewhat holy, I would say that there definitely is something with that process of creating art. Is like, it's almost like you're not even the one creating it. It's like it creates itself, but you're like the transmitter or something like that, because you pick a chord, there's only a number of chords that can sound good with that chord, so it's almost like you're slowly boxing yourself into what the finished product is, and it's almost like it's just revealing itself the longer you work on it. would
Yeah, yeah.
you would you relate to that at all?
Oh, absolutely. Like I would say, with my fine artwork, I have consistently said I am merely the receiver. You know, and that's been true since I had my real breakthrough moment with art. Was suddenly realizing that it wasn't really coming from me. It was I was receiving it, and it was my responsibility to honor the muse and make it real. And that's sort of this interesting thing about inspiration is, uh, if you are lucky enough to get it, you have an obligation to realize it. Because if you don't, that's a sure sign that you're not fit to get it again. And I've gone through lots of periods where I haven't made any work, and really sort of struggled. But the reason why was because, I'd had one good idea that I didn't finish. I sound very superstitious about it, but I really think it's true. Yeah, no, was it, I think Quincy Jones was saying, music's just 12 notes, man, you know, and there are only so many places you can go with it. But if you manage to find a song that hasn't been sung before, uh, boy, you got to sing it.
Yeah, for sure. I think about that process. It's almost like order emerging from chaos sort of thing, like music out of static. It's like a universal thing. But
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I can get really metaphysical with that. Um,
if you liked it, you're welcome to. I don't know how much time
oh
we
no,
have
no,
here, but
I'm gonna sound really stupid, but I
okay.
mean, I had a friend that we were talking about, because I have a very amateur, outside, barely understanding perspective, but interest in physics. And we were talking about sort of, those main subatomic uh, forces, and all sort of in frame of the notion of string theory. And I can't help but think about string theory in terms of resonant frequency, and how we have notes that, with the right emotion, just will pull something out of the core of us. And um, feel like music is written into existence. And uh, for me, you know, the ability for us to speak to each other on an emotional level comes because we are dealing in the language of physics and creation. I told you I was gonna get, yeah,
Yeah, that's great. It definitely there's something to that for sure because words are something that can provoke emotion, but they're just so like the latency of information that you can convey is so low. But with music, it's like it doesn't matter what language you speak, you can still feel it in a way,
yeah,
and that's fascinating.
yeah.
Okay, your album Desire. You said that that was an album that was very autobiographical.
Hmm.
Um, so you mentioned exploring a running theme of life in the midst of redefinition,
Yeah,
uh, and the songs kind of speak to that process. So, what kind of inspired that theme for you, or what sort of themes do you explore on the album?
sure. Um, there was a point in the time that I wasn't doing Mr. Moth that I had gotten very frustrated with the fact that that was something that I really regarded as a core part of my identity, but I hadn't made anything in a long time at that point. Um, and so I had been kind of dealing with trying to rediscover who I was. Was that music who I was anymore? Did it fit me? What did I? Who was that person? So I kind of gave myself a challenge, which was I'm going to get up tomorrow morning and I'm going to start a song, and my objective is going to be to finish that song by the end of the day. Music, lyrics, I didn't have anything in my head other than that place that I had found myself spiritually where I was not sure um, what was next for me. The song that came out of that was "The End of the Road," and most of what ended up on that on of that version on the album was as it was recorded that day. So in that, no time to sort of reconsider: are these lyrics too basic? Am I being too obvious about this? Is it too rudimentary? I just didn't have time to consider any of that. So in that, I had forced myself to really expose myself emotionally, and uh, that song really kind of became the mission statement of the album. And song is about finding yourself in a place where everything that you thought would fulfill you, you can have it, and it may not do it. You may find that there's no such thing as fulfillment in acquisition. Um, and the process of writing this album was me really kind of coming to the understanding of what sort of finishes the album in the title track, Desire, that sometimes it is the desire itself, anticipation, um, the the wanting to anticipate what is on the other side of the horizon that drives us over that horizon, and working through that to try to find a place where I could be happy again, to understand what made me happy, was sort of worked through in the album. Um, there's a sort of set of songs where you see the narrator, which is me, basically say, "Well, I'm not happy where I am. Are these things that make me happy? Can anybody make me happy? What does happiness even mean to me?" Um, and then right at sort of like the halfway point in the album, a life change is made. A past is sort of let go of. Um, a new home is found, and it really is all about sort of that process I had of putting down an old relationship and moving halfway across the country to Ohio, and starting over. And that's where those songs come from. It's all about sort of that experience. Um, it's not exactly a concept album, not like most of my old ones tend to be, but it's, I can't help but sort of work with a theme, and I don't really feel like I've got a handle on what I'm making until I understand what that theme is. And there is absolutely one to that album.
I really like that message that you discussed about arriving at an understanding that anticipation and desire offer fulfillment itself are where you find your happiness.
Hmm.
So I think I kind of take that personally as, I feel like the world is literally driven by desire. Like that is the thing that keeps us going. It helps us survive. Things like that. So it's a very essential part of what we are. Yet it's also essential that that desire doesn't be fulfilled, or else we wouldn't continue to push forward. So I try to focus on enjoying life in the process of it. So it's like if I make, we'll just use music as an example. So my goal or my desire might be to create this song and have it be really good. But if I go into it with the expectation that that's going to make me happy, I'll be completely dissatisfied at the end of it, and I'll miss out on the actual true nectar of the experience, which is creating it. It's the work that you put into it.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Like I get to the end of any track, and it's just it used to be depression that I would run into. Anytime I finish making something, that experience, the process of it, that dialogue coming out, finding the last little nuances that have to be adjusted in order to really regard it as finished. All of that process is just so electrifying and revitalizing that once it comes to an end, you're kind of like, well, what do I do with this energy now? What next? And the answer is give it a couple of days and start something else. And that's really it. It's like, as soon as you get over the horizon, whatever drew you over the horizon, once you're there, that horizon's still there. Just keep going.
yeah,
Uh, which is why that song, "The End of the Road," is so, almost kind of funny in that regard because, you know, all of my friends who were listening to me make that were like, "Dum dum, you just turn around. That's where you go at the end of the road. You just go the other way." I'm like, no, you go off road. You, that's kind of what I figured out was just keep going. So
awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the Desire Remix album that you have, and that just came out last Friday.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. So let's see. I don't I don't have many notes about it. I listened to it though for sure. I thought it was really cool. The song Desolation, and I guess some of these songs are from the original album, but maybe talk about that song Desolation and how it relates to uh, maybe climate change, ecological crises, like you said, or maybe even COVID.
Hmm. Yeah. So there were um, in the process of working on songs, I have a tendency to kind of build up everything modularly. Um, I'll kind of start with a set of sounds, and then I'll see what they kind of suggest to me. That dialogue happens, and so some of the ideas that I was working with sort of congealed into a song called Shark Eyes, that's on the original Desire album. But I had this one section that I was working on that was so annoyingly catchy that I couldn't just delete it, even though it didn't work with the rest of the song. Um, and I knew it was another song, but it was just so damn hooky that I couldn't let go of it. Um, because I would just, it would start and I didn't know where to go from there. It would just, I would have it working on a loop where it would just go back to the beginning of it. And I kept listening for where it was supposed to go after that. Um, and I could never kind of resolve that question. Uh, so I just decided at a certain point, I've got to set this thing down because I got to move on with making the rest of the album.
Yeah,
Um,
that's one of the hardest things with making electronic music is taking a loop and turning it into a song.
Yeah, like it's easy to get the first verse. It's easy to get, maybe a couple of lines of a chorus. It's the second verse that's a bear, and like fleshing out the core of an idea into a whole song is really challenging. Well, that one, I just had the chorus, like that sort of high, lingering synth line, and I was in love with it, but I just didn't know what to do with it. Um, so I set it aside to finish Desire and kind of wrap that album. Um, well, I had thought to myself, I'll revisit it someday, but I know that I don't necessarily kind of want to go back and make that same album again. So when am I ever going to pick the song up? I've got like uh, gigs of starts and stops of songs that just never got anywhere. And I thought, well, here's the ones that's going on the scrap pile for this album. Um, so when I finished the album and put it out last October, I thought, okay, well, I could just kind of just send it out into the ether and hope that it goes somewhere, or I could try to promote it. And it's been a long time since this band has been a band, and I've had people to play with. I've been here for 5 years, and I've kind of just been squirreled away teaching and working on my art. Um, well, I decided that it was time for me to start putting a band together again. And I knew that I needed to be able to kind of come in and have my hand around playing this song properly. So I just spent a lot of time rehearsing myself. Um, and had just kind of gotten myself situated. I want to say probably around February. I'd gotten in contact with somebody that I was going to start playing with. And we'd kind of like just made a note that in late March we were going to get together and start playing. And then out of nowhere, pandemic hits, and that plan kind of got shelved. This first couple of months of this, nobody saw anybody. We're all kind of like in our homes, just kind of waiting for it to pass over. And so it just kind of completely shelved that idea about playing live, at least in the short term. And of course, now there's no live music industry at present. Um, so I thought, well, I've got to do something else with this time. And having already been working on the songs and kind of getting into the heart of them and thinking about how they were structured and what would I have done differently with it. Maybe I want to change up the arrangements a little bit for the live performance, something like that. Um, the conclusion that I came to was, oh, well, maybe I can take these other ideas that I have and I can make remixes. I would, any day of the week, I would much rather make something brand new. Um, than kind of re-explore an old idea, which is one of the reasons why I've never really been that in love with playing live shows with mrmoth. It was just like, well, let's just keep going. Let's keep making new things. But of course, you can make them and nobody hears them if you don't go out and integrate them socially. So playing live is a necessity. But I just thought to myself, okay, well, what am I going to do with the time and this perspective? So I came to the conclusion that I would just start making remixes. And the trade-off that I made with myself was, okay, if you're going to put out, rehashes of these songs that you've already done, you must make something new. So I went back into my folder of unfinished songs, and that one was sitting right there going, I'm ready, let's do something. Um, and then, so it happened that song kind of started to come together. Um, I had made sort of a promise to myself that if I ever picked up that song again, however cute and hooky and sentimental it sounded, I would not let that be the lyric that was, paired with it. I wanted to not make it a love song or something sappy. Um, and I had had this kind of growing sense of dread and frustration that I think was exacerbated when Greta came out and sort of indicted the world for inaction. Um, that she kind of put a voice to, and I think that was one of the reasons why it was such a huge resonant moment for a lot of the culture. Um, so she kind of kicked me in the butt to turn that song into what it became, and it's really a reflection on why we find ourselves just paralyzed of doing anything about it, with all of the mechanics of industry and money that get in and seem to distract us and take us off of the focus of wrapping our brains around a very large problem. And it was funny, as I was working on that song, it happened that COVID happened. And, you know, as I'm kind of thinking about this perspective and watching, our own human civilization kind of be paralyzed by our inaction on the environment, I'm also watching the same things happen with our culture writ small here in America with COVID. You know, we're now in the third wave of this thing, and it's bigger and worse than ever. And for some reason, we can't handle it. You know, money, perspectives on it, whatever, but we're in that same weird space. And it, again, it kills people. It certainly makes them suffer. Why can't we do anything about this? Why can't we just pull together and do what we need to get done? The answers, weirdly enough, seem to have a lot in common. So, I didn't set out to write a song that had kind of relevance in that perspective, but I just couldn't help but notice that it kind of did. So,
so that song "Protected" with the music video.
Yeah.
So we were talking about that a little bit. And I have to say, yeah, it's really interesting when you use this sort of archetypical lyrical writing where the things you're saying can be applied to so many different circumstances. Like when somebody listens to it, they can take their own subjective meaning from it. And it takes a lot to both write something that means something, but also is accessible to everyone in a way. So you mentioned that the music video kind of played out in your head when you were making the song or when the song was finished. Could you talk a little bit about maybe what inspired that song, what inspired the music video, and also if you know off of your memory, like that topic of that idea of axis mundi. I looked that up, read a little bit, thought it was interesting. So yeah, do you have any thoughts about that?
The thing with Protected was, I think it's accurate to say that it was probably the last song that was started and finished on Desire, which is weird because it starts the album. I had no desire, I had no interest in starting the album with The End of the Road. I wanted something else to start that album up. So it was Protected was the last song started and finished for Desire, and I wanted a song that would function as an introduction to the album. When you work in art and you are trying to communicate with people on a level of ambiguity, you find that there are inbuilt sort of words in the common human vernacular that are really omnipresent in everybody. And I wanted a song that would function essentially as protection for me being vulnerable on this album. So that is a song that is kind of walking into the moment that Desire starts on, basically saying, I'm going to talk about what is at the core of me, and I'm going to extend um, an invitation to others to hear me talk about this. But I want you to know that uh, I'm immune to any sort of vulnerability on this. So that song, as I was working on it, a story very clearly had kind of started to form in my head. Um, while there is a lot of music on that album that is about myself, I found that I was having trouble getting places with it if I didn't find a way to make it about other people. Like I really kind of loathe music that is too um, self-involved. So, like Metropolitan is about some people that I know, but it's also about me. Um, Autonomy is about me, but it's also about somebody else. I'm talking to somebody else. Um, so this environmental theme, the notion of the environment and the sense of self being something that I want to protect is kind of where that comes from. In that the video shows somebody basically kind of walking through um, a forest, and the forest has loads of connotations to it. Um, Sort of protecting it, finding places of trouble and easing it and helping to soothe it. Is kind of where the idea of that song came from. Um, the exact function of the lyrics of that, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into, but starting with that notion of establishing a floor, a baseline, um, that's to say that I'm starting with myself. Um, Drive a nail down through its core is saying that I am extending a line between the self and whatever, you know. The Axis Mundi is served as an antenna. It's a lot of things. I mean, anybody can
Mm.
research that. But, you know, basically to say we're opening a conduit here between the self and other things. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Awesome.
The most elaborate non-answer I think anybody's ever given a journalist. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. That's pretty fascinating. Yeah, that's a cool song. I can really appreciate like the amount of production that went into it. Some really unique sounds.
Well, and that was the thing. It's like that album, as much as I hate the notion of sort of revisiting the 80s too much, there's a lot of references to the 80s on that album.
Hmm.
And because I wanted to make something that was very song driven, very concise, something that was, catchy and danceable. Everything that I used to do with this band was very, not experimental. I mean, there were song structures in there, but I was, thinking about trying to make kind of like that perfect techno pop album with Desire. And once I had gotten to the end of the process and was thinking about what is this album lacking, and it was something that was forward looking as well. And that was what I was trying to do musically with the production on Protected. I had spent enough time sort of making reference to the 80s, that I really wanted something that didn't feel like it had come from anything that had been done before, whereas a lot of that album does. So I appreciate that you liked the production on that, because in my head I was thinking, this is what I want to do. This is what's next for me. Um, and it's a bit of it. I know what the next album is. I know what it sounds like, and that informs where I go. But I don't know that that I would have been happy with that album if Protected hadn't come along.
Awesome. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about like what are your future plans? What might you be working on right now? But if you want to, before that, I'd also like to ask, just like with your music, do you primarily create it for yourself? Like you kind of got into that a little bit. Like, is this for you to create because it's something that you want to do, or part of it is for other people to hear it and listen to it? And if that's the case, like what kind of impact would you like to make on others' lives by having experienced your music?
If I am left alone with my brain, I can't help but start making things. If it's visual things, if I don't have a computer, I will pick up a pencil and a paper. I don't even have to have paper. I will draw on anything. My brain just has to make stuff all the time. Um, so I wouldn't say that I make things for others, and I wouldn't say that I make them for myself. I can't help but do it. Um, but you raise a good question, which is, what on earth is this all for? If it's, if it's just meant to not be heard by people, why make it? And, just keep it to yourself. And the reality is that of course I want people to hear my music. And once this whole mess ends, I've still got that desire to go out and start playing in front of people. I love playing with other musicians. That sort of uh, communal experience with making music is, I mean, if anybody who's ever been in a band will tell you, like the second everybody finds it and locks in on it, it you don't have that experience often with other people. So I want to get back to playing live. That has continued to be true, and to the extent that still any given day, if I'm just too full of energy, I'll walk in and I'll just turn on the amp and I'll just start playing guitar. I can't not do it. Um, but the reality is, who knows how long this is going to last? Um, as far as this COVID thing, uh, and again, I can't stop creating. So I wasn't done with this record before I was working on tracks for the next one. It's kind of a constant, and I know more or less because I know what my work sounds like, how it evolves. I knew very well that what I was making was for this next album that I'm going to start working on. I would like it to be with other people because I really enjoy collaboration. Um, but it's not always easy to find other people who want to work with electronic music as a basis. So I think the process of working on this record is going to be one where I'm also trying to collect people that I can kind of put together and make an actual live band with. I would like that to be a component of the next album.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's definitely a crazy experience playing music with other people. Sometimes you can get into this state of almost like a shared consciousness where you're both contributing and experiencing the same thing together.
Mhm.
Really cool stuff. So, so yeah, you mentioned you're working on the next album. You're always working on the next thing. Are there any more details you'd like to talk about with that? In terms of, oh yeah, you said that COVID, we don't really know when that'll be over. So, yeah,
Yeah,
you kind of
well,
answered the question.
no, well, I mean, I can give you more details. What I would say is the first four albums that I put out as Mr. Moth uh, all have a common theme. There's a concept that kind of winds their way through it, and um, the small group of people I have amassed as calling themselves fans or whatever of what I do have been kind of waiting for the last chapter of that concept. That sound for those records was heavier, more guitar, um, eccentric. I guess you could say. I want to get back to that sound. It's filmic. It's more kind of grand, and that's kind of what I want to start doing next. I've been making all of these instrumentals that sound very like film scores, and I know what they're lacking is the other instruments to kind of come in and take them to the next place. So that's what I'm working on next. There's a new album and a new EP, all digital outlets. It's the Desire Remixes. Um, it's what I regard as a nice companion piece to the album that I put out last year called Desire, and I would kind of consider hearing them together. Um, if you want to know more about me and the Mr. Moth project, there's a lot of information at my website, which is mrmoth.com.